here with us today. If she can record. So welcome everyone. Happy Tuesday. Happy that you're here. Again, I just really appreciate you giving some space over your lunchtime. And again, we're going to be a small group this afternoon. There might be some people coming in and out. But that's okay. I appreciate the smaller groups because it allows us to engage, ask questions, and provide a space for uplifting conversation and connecting with everyone here. So a few of you were on the call with us last week, and as we took a journey in a compact car, as I said, but for today, I'd like to think of this next hour together as that we're on an adventure on a Minnesota lake, perhaps in a large pontoon. That way we all have enough space, but we're still a smaller group. And think of us as lake guides versus pro fishermen on the bass circuit. I do love to fish, but I'm definitely not a pro fisherman. But we have a lot to uplift. So it might feel as though we're in a bass boat versus a pontoon, as we're going to be cruising through a lot of great resources and tools to share with all of you. But know that this space is for you. Everyone has a story to tell. You're the experts in your own experiences. So with that, we really want to encourage you to leave your camera on and unmute and engage in conversation or ask questions if you're able to. I know some folks have said that their camera doesn't work, and that's quite all right. We're still happy you're here. But if you do have questions, you can also pop them into the chat, and we'll do our best to address them as we go. And if not, near the end, I'll leave a space for that. And if I miss anything, I'm going to save the chat, and I'll make sure that I reach back out to you directly and can address your question or your concern. But really our goal in this space is that we want you to, when we pull back into the dock on our pontoon, that you're going to be able to walk away with some great resources that your organization or agency can utilize and implement when it comes to supporting young people during the element of closure and also in times of transition. All right, we've got a few folks that are just joining us too. Again, we're happy you're here. But to ground us this afternoon in our conversation, I'm going to allow us just a couple of minutes to kind of reflect on our own experiences. And this is what I call the mindful minute. And it's just a couple minute video that really, encourages you to think about your own experiences. Because as we know, closure and transitions can be really scary for young people and their caregivers. So like all of you, the adults in their life. And this can be a time of uncertainty for them. And so leaning into our own experiences allows us to just take a moment to be more empathetic and providing our lenses through or using an empathetic lens as we provide those supports for young people in our lives. To ground us, again, I really just wanted us to take a couple minutes to kind of think about that. And I love that video. There isn't any other words coming in as far as a voice. And so you can kind of just let your own self, your own inner voice kind of talk to you and think about your own experiences. And I'd like to stay in this space of reflecting for just a minute and invite you to share in the chat. You know, Jimmy Fallon always uses the hashtags, right? But just hashtag or just write a word in the chat of something that comes to mind, words that come to mind when you hear closure. Again, there are no right or wrong answers here. I'm just curious. Peace. Thanks, Annie. And endings, new beginning. Yeah, absolutely. How about the word transition? New, sort of the opposite of what you mentioned earlier, challenging, change, beginnings. Absolutely. So appreciate everyone for sharing that. And I think, again, it's important for us to kind of think about when we hear those words and think about program planning, to reflect back on our own ideas of what we think, you know, closure means or what a transition means. And then pull that back into our work as we're building out programming that supports closure and transitions. And by drawing from our own experiences, we can create spaces that really allow mentors and mentees to prepare, to reflect, and affirm their relationship, right? Because as we see with everyone is very different in their thinking or maybe their experiences when it comes to closure or when it comes to their experiences with transition. So recognizing too that everyone has a different experience, but again, leaning into our own can really help us center around that empathetic and supportive lens in doing that. So we're going to dive in. Again, we're on this amazing pontoon together, right? So this is our nautical map, if you will, of our time for this next a little bit less than an hour. So lunch and learns are really we pull them together to hit kind of content at a high level, but to provide resources and tools to you. But if you're interested in deeper dives when it comes to content such as closure or transition planning, we will be offering both a full elements of effective practice for mentoring for program leaders, such as yourselves. And we'll also be providing a cohort of learning around the nuts and bolts of sustainable programming that we'll be talking about transitions as well. Both of those trainings will be in November. So just wanted to mention that. But for today, we're going to start with introductions because it's always good to start from a good place, and that's kind of getting to know each other. Then we're going to provide some foundational knowledge with this content and provide a super quick mini workshop on closure and times of transition. Then we're going to highlight some impactful resources and provide a space for questions and really conversation with all of us here on the call today. So who is Mentor Minnesota and what do we do? So we've been referred to as sort of the Chamber of Commerce for mentoring. It really comes down to us believing in empirical research and evidence best practices as our guide and providing trainings and events such as this, and supporting programs through resources, by providing technical assistance, by providing workshops and cohort learning. And really our vision, our dream as an organization is that all youth have agency and power at home, at school, out in their community, and out in the workplace. And really that means that we want to be here and support you, the adults, in their lives. Sarah Schaefer, our executive director, could not be with us today, but I'm Emily Garay. I'm the program director for Mentor Minnesota. And I'm really excited to be here with my coworker, Allie. So Allie, I'll hand the mic over to you to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Allie. I'm the marketing and development manager at Mentor Minnesota. And I'll go into the prompt for today, which is a dream you have for your program or organization. And I would just love to see, since I'm kind of on that marketing side, like I would just love anyone to know about our resources and like spread knowledge of the benefits of mentoring, I guess. So yeah. Back to you, Emily.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Allie. I appreciate that. And I appreciate, yeah, that she knew it was coming up for me to ask all of you. But I'd love for you to share in the chat your name, your pronouns, the organization, agency, or program you're joining us with. And then, as Allie shared, a dream that you have for your program. I know a dream I have for the work that I'm doing is really to connect to every little nook and cranny in Minnesota. And so that both, and I mentioned this in a meeting earlier this morning, but that we can support young people both in urban centers as well as rural communities. So that's really a dream that I have. But I'd love for all of you to go ahead and in the chat, again, introduce yourselves a little bit and then share a dream that you have for your program. Because I do think it's important to continue to dream and think for future planning. After all, that is what we're going to be talking about a little bit further too. So as folks are sharing in the chat, I'm going to jump in just because I know our time is limited here today. But really a foundational thought that you're going to notice is a highlighted theme kind of throughout this afternoon, and that's mentoring with the end in mind. So what does that mean? In other words, backwards planning within mentorship. Backwards planning really ensures that we can create a healthy close to mentoring relationships and also create smooth transitions for young people. We know if we know what our goal is within closure and transitions, then we can go ahead and plan to support that goal. So again, knowing our goal here in that thought bubble on the slide is really ensuring that young people feel affirmed, are provided support throughout the transition in a healthy and positive way. And again, when I asked all of you to kind of share in the chat what came to mind with closure and transitions, some were more on the positive side and maybe some weren't so much. So again, we're trying to think on ways that we can affirm all of those different diverse ideas going into transition and going into closure in a healthy and positive way. And again, that way then we can create plans for steps to ensure that the outcome is what we, that outcome, that goal is met. For example, and this is that we know that an appropriately timed closure process is key for effectively closing a youth mentoring relationship. So even under non-ideal or maybe in unexpected circumstances, as you know, we learned the past couple of years with the pandemic, healthy closure can still exist. And that's really if we're able to backwards plan for having policies and procedures in place that we can again ensure that healthy closure is there so that we provide that support for mentees and the mentors. And we want to be able to provide them opportunities to really reflect on their experience. And so again, affirming that relationship. So you're going to hear me say backwards planning quite a bit the next few minutes, but a little bit more foundational knowledge when it comes to the components of closure and transition planning, and that it's critical to carefully manage mentoring relationship closures as it's really vital to ensuring those positive outcomes for youth, as I mentioned. So really, what can you programs do? Programs should really try to prioritize facilitating bringing the match to a close, and again, in a way that affirms the mentor and mentee and all that they brought to that relationship, and then also offers them a space to prepare and assess the experience that they had together. And from an ethical standpoint, we know that careful management of mentoring relationships closures is really critical to ensuring positive outcomes for youth. And I'm going to just mention that again. So we know that careful management, again, that backwards planning, right? Doing the work ahead of time of that mentoring relationship and being able to recognize that that relationship will come to a close at some point is really critical to ensuring positive outcomes for youth. So why this matters. So youth mentoring research suggests that failing to provide some resolution or closure processes at the end of a relationship can be particularly damaging for mentees who have been let down by other relationships with adults. So these youth are more likely to become vulnerable to negative feelings. Without a supported closure process, youth might internalize negative feelings like feeling abandoned, feeling fearful or scared, and also leads to confusion, right? It's hard to kind of wrap your head around things that you don't understand. And so if we don't have supported closures, this can really lead to those negative feelings for young people. So we want to be upfront and share that about a third to half of all youth mentoring relationships end prematurely. And this is problematic beyond those unmet expectations for youth and families. So youth involved in mentoring relationships that end early show decreases in self-worth and academic performance as well. So how can we then, as program leaders, avoid these negative feelings for youth and reduce mentoring relationships from ending prematurely? So here's kind of the takeaway. So if we can be intentional about having really clear communication and backwards planning with that end in mind, we can support and ensure that there's understanding for young people, and not only that young person, but then those caring adults in their life. And creating that clarity from the beginning of the match as much as possible can really avoid any confusion and avoids possible harm. And we're going to break this down a little further, but that's really kind of the foundation with today's content. So in the chat, we're going to share, if you'd like, this is our elements of effective practice for mentoring. And as I shared earlier, that we're going to be hosting a full elements of effective practice for mentoring training coming up in November if you're interested. But we will, I see Ali shared it in the chat. If you want to take this resource, again, it's at no cost. You can explore it, take it back to your teams, check it out, take little notes. I've also created a resource packet for all of you to walk away with today. And so again, any resources that we put into the chat are going to be included in those resources in a wraparound following this. But in short, what is closure? So closure is the process of really transitioning or ending a relationship. And this is a natural part of the mentoring life cycle, though, though it's a part of the natural mentoring life cycle, it can still be difficult, right? You can kind of think about maybe when relationships ended in your own life. I'm not going to ask you to share, but kind of thinking, sometimes those relationships ending can be difficult. So how then can we really support that process? The first is to be clear and be honest. So again, providing the mentee and the mentor with realistic expectations. I think sometimes programs want to, recruitment is a struggle sometimes. And so they really want to engage and invite folks in. But sometimes if those expectations are unrealistic, it can lead to a mentoring match to end prematurely. So again, we really want to create those realistic expectations throughout the entire relationship. So not just at the beginning, but really throughout that relationship and through the closure process. We want to keep it positive. So providing opportunities for mentors and mentees to reflect back, look on their accomplishments together. I think sometimes it can get easy to get sucked into like what's not going right, but instead flipping that and create spaces to celebrate, create spaces to provide joy and affirm relationships is really important when it comes to closure. And lastly, develop an appropriate and realistic plan for continued communication. So again, having in your program policies something around continued communication, what's both realistic and appropriate for your programming. So transition planning can be a useful tool in this space, particularly to support closure and provide clear understanding. So again, you're setting the mentor and the mentee up for success, even if that relationship is coming to an end. But you want to provide a healthy transition for them. On the program management side, again, from the jump, it's really important to create spaces to talk about closure process throughout the mentoring relationship with matches and also their family and caregivers so that everyone is aware of the closure process. And again, you're sort of talking about it and making it a part of the conversation throughout the relationship. So again, it's not like a blind side or something that's coming at a really big surprise or creating uncertainty later in that relationship. It's also important for, on a program management side, to develop those policies and procedures for managing anticipated and unanticipated closures. Again, thinking back to that backwards planning, we want to ensure that young people are affirmed and provided support. And we can do that if we're backwards planning into creating spaces that, you know, if something happens and that relationship needs to end, what do we do? If it's, you know, a premature ending or if it's a natural ending, that we know which way we can go and to still provide that support. And some useful tools, we're going to be sharing these in the chat as well, is that you can go ahead and this is an exit interview template. So some really helpful tools with supporting closure are exit interviews. There's the formal closure agreement, continued contact forms, conducting a final match meeting and what that looks like. There's ways of celebrating and providing those spaces of joy and different activities for that match. And then again, providing ways to reflect and celebrate. And so again, we're going to share a copy of that exit interview, and that's just an example. And then in your resource packet, I have a bunch of other templates and tools that you can go ahead and explore if you're interested in, for instance, if it's a formal closure agreement, what that might look like for your program as you're building out your policies and procedures, et cetera. So that will all be included in your resources. So as program leaders, some things to kind of think about. As I shared, I'm going to be sharing all of these different templates and tools for you, but I'm curious, you know, if your program, if you're kind of thinking back, and again, you can kind of just self-reflect on this, if you will, but does your program have adequate policies and procedures to address all possible closure scenarios? So that would be if it's ending prematurely or if it's coming to its natural close. Is this something that you have? And also, do you inform participants? So that would be your mentors, your mentees, of closure policies throughout the match. Again, trying to avoid sort of a blind side and not being sure or creating confusion. Again, informing those participants within a match of those policies that your program has. Thanks, Marie. Happy you jumped in for a minute. And then also, in thinking about this, we're going to share some additional closure templates that will hopefully be helpful if you're reflecting on this, and maybe your program is, maybe that's a sticky point for you, and maybe you don't have what you feel would maybe be an adequate policies and procedures around closure. These might be some good jumping off points for you to consider. Again, creating clarity as much as possible avoids that confusion. You know, it prevents that self-doubt from a mentee side or sadness and disappointment. Again, if it, you know, something else that I think is really important to follow through with is those clear program goals and expectations around the relationship commitment. So if that's duration, if that's frequency, you know, and again, I know for some programs, they've switched from all in-person, virtual, and now we're kind of in a hybrid space. But then talking about communication, again, you're talking about what is expected from a mentee and what's expected from a mentor. And that just allows for that relationship to continue to build trust and understanding. And again, that regular communication with your participants. So all of you that are program leaders in this space, checking in with those individuals and often, and checking in to see if goals are being reached or if there's something that they've achieved together and there's ways that they want to maybe celebrate and uplift that. and then talking about new goals, right? A few recommendations that we could offer in this space is to prepare your mentors and mentees for endings again from the beginning. Let mentors know that closure may be tough, but that they'll have you to help. And also, this helps to warn against slow fade or false promises, which in some cases might be more damaging than a conflicted ending, meaning that, if a mentor is maybe nervous about the closure process, or a mentee is nervous about the transition and coming to a closure, they might just fade, right? And then that just leaves for a lot of uncertainty and confusion, and sometimes can be more damaging. So we just want to be really upfront and honest, and again, providing that support and letting our matches know that we're here for them throughout this closure process. And again, being really clear and realistic with them. And from closures comes times of transition, right? Perhaps a summer program, maybe some of you ran a summer program and now you're going to be going into fall programming and new matches are going to be happening. Or perhaps you work with students and students went from being in a middle school over to a high school, or from a high school to a post-secondary institution, or maybe the workforce. So we're going to talk really about some transitional tools that might be helpful. For a little bit of context too, and listening to your feedback from our prior event that we had last week, talking about educational supports, we wanted to provide you all with more information when it came to working with young people with disabilities. So perhaps those young people that have an IEP or a 504 plan, we wanted to highlight a couple of those tools that are often used in transition planning. And though we won't be able to dive deeply into this, we do want to highlight a few critical aspects, because these aspects really work well in working with young people in general when it comes to preparing them for a mentorship relationship closing, preparing them for the future, guiding and supporting them through transitions and life's journey, all of the above. So not only I'll talk a little bit specifically about IEPs and 504 plans, but really a lot of this can be used in any setting within any programming. So just kind of keeping that in mind. But this first graphic that you see on the right is the individual centered planning. And really the key to transitional planning is that the young person here is at the center. So, focusing on their interests, their strengths, their goals, looking at transitional planning sort of with the individual versus for the individual. PACER, as many of you are maybe aware of, is a local champion when it comes to providing resources, when it comes to transitional planning and other supports for families and young people that have disabilities. But we want to highlight, and we added those into the chat for you, and I'll give some more in that resource packet as well. But they do have some really wonderful templates when it comes to transitional tools. But again, kind of looking at this individual centered planning, again, the individual is at the center. So again, looking at their interests, their goals, maybe that individual wants to go into a post-secondary setting. Maybe that individual doesn't. Maybe they want to go into the workforce. And so how can we best support them? And that's through creating sort of this teamwork or group effort around that individual. And it can go a long way. So mentors are not expected to be the one and only superhero, right? That super supporter. They can be one of them, but really rather act as a connecting force between community resources, between educators, and expand those webs of support and social capital. So really, it's rather thinking about this, how we as supporters in the life of this individual can kind of wrap our arms around this young person, and how can we work together to uplift and support them. So again, it might be the public agencies, it might be you all, like community organizations or programs, it might be their educational system that they're transferring from and going into, and also keeping in mind the importance of including family and caregivers in this discussion when it comes to transitional mapping tools. And then the other example on the left-hand side is the individual centered planning, the individual transition map. And some refer to this as the what, so what, now what planning, right? So the what being, where am I now? So this is a tool that you could use with young people that you work with. It might be mentees within your program, or students that you're working with, but asking them to kind of reflect and where are they now? So that might be, what are their interests? What are their needs? What are their strengths? Right? And using that asset-based lens to try to keep things in that positive light, but while still addressing their needs that they might need for support. The so what, or where do I want to go? So what experiences do I want to try? Or who are the people that I'd like to meet, and addressing those expectations. And that's really where too, this web of support around the individual can be so crucial in supporting this work. Because lastly, the now what, how do I get there? So that's addressing goals, also highlighting those supports and services that can uplift those goals. Again, programs can really help support goal development through programming opportunities, by providing connections to opportunities, and providing those positive relationships with caring adults to increase that social capital for young people. I know I'm tossing a lot at you all, but we're going to dive into a discussion here shortly. So, but again, this is rather just a highlight of the resources that I'll be sharing with you, so you kind of know what they are ahead of time. And don't panic. There's a lot on this slide, but I've created this and put it in your resources. But I do want to mention, and I won't read through this because again, I'm sure all of you are probably already getting tired of hearing my voice, but I do want programs to be aware that during transitional planning, that it's important to recognize that if you're working with young people with disabilities, the laws do change. And though I'm not a legal expert, we do want to provide you with some tools and resources for you to learn more, and that you can put in your toolbox while you're supporting your mentors, your mentees, your families. But always we recommend seeking legal counsel if you have specific questions or concerns regarding specific laws. But on the left, you'll see that for young people that are connected to the K-12 public school, those young people are entitled to services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And again, public schools have an obligation to provide services and report progress. So if a young person is moving from elementary to middle school to high school, these buildings still have an obligation to provide services. And again, caregivers for people with disabilities should begin thinking about specific transition planning as early as possible, but really the formal process begins in 9th grade. So if you have any young people from middle school going into high school, that's really when that formal process generally begins. But again, kind of thinking back on keeping these transition plans youth-centered and based off of that young person's interests, strengths, and goals. And then after high school here on the right, this is for those individuals going to maybe post-secondary or leaving a K-12 program and going out into the workplace. These services are protected. They're no longer entitled. And that just means that the services are accessible based off of self-advocacy. So what's important here as we uplift transition planning for families and for our programs is that how can we help provide them with those tools, and also highlighting ways that they can self-advocate for what they need, depending on where they're going, if it is college or out in the workplace. And lastly, just down here at the bottom, I will mention that most post-secondary institutions do have a disability student service for you. So definitely look into that, or kind of just tag that if you do have young people that are going into that space. And when it comes to heading into the workforce, there's the vocational rehabilitation services, and those are state run. And many employment opportunities provide these programs to help young people with disabilities to prepare, locate, and maintain employment. And thanks, Holly. I have so many screens going on too, and I can hear my voice, and then like, so different when we're not in person, right? But again, I'll share this with all of you that you can use this tool. I will mention quickly too, that if you do want to learn more, it just so happens that Pacer is actually providing a training tonight, a virtual event that you can go ahead and register for, and they're going to be highlighting laws and rights regarding transition planning specifically. I believe we'll add the information in the chat, but I believe it's 6:30. But you can definitely find more information there. Again, but Pacer has a plethora of different resources and tools for you specifically in this space. So kind of lastly, before we dive into questions and comments and conversation, many of us work out in communities, right? And so how can we come up with some strategies in working with community partners when it comes to transition planning? First, I'd love to know, and you can pop it into the chat, but what are some ways that maybe your program works with your community right now? Or what is a way that you want to get connected to your community to pull them in? So it can either be a goal you have or something that you're proud of right now that your program is already doing to involve community. I do have a hint for maybe a different idea if you haven't thought about it, is that service providers or program leaders like yourselves and families can collaborate together. Working closely with service providers and families and the young person really helps to build up this pool of knowledge, and can really be helpful in creating program plans that support smooth transitions, that support meeting the needs of young people, that provide programs or create programs that are of the young person's interest and things that they're maybe concerned about or want to learn more about. Ramsey County Children's Mental Health Collaborative. Yes, they are amazing. I know there's a few of you on the call. And if you haven't checked out Ramsey County Children's Mental Health Collaborative, I highly, highly encourage you to check it out. They do an amazing job. I see Annie mentioned here the deep breathing exercises, yoga, art therapy. I was just on a call with Mary Sue Hansen from Ramsey County as well, and she was talking about being at an event this last weekend at the library and connecting with folks at the library to put on a community event and talking about art and therapy and all these amazing things. But again, kind of thinking of community as collaboration, right? And allowing folks to really come in, and this helps build relationships and understanding program components and outcomes. It helps relationship mapping. So when you're working with young people and their families, you're able to say, you know, there's this resource, maybe it's Ramsey County Children's Mental Health Collaborative, and they provide this support. They're here for you. Maybe it's working with St. Paul Public Schools, and they provide this service. So again, thinking of community is bringing everyone in to really provide effective communication and early planning. Again, even thinking of this as working with community rather than for, and that's huge. No matter what part of programming is really pulling in that community support. Also, the county where you live, it has a list of licensed employment agencies for young people to get connected to. So if you haven't done that, depending on what county you're in, if it's Hennepin, Ramsey, they do have a list of licensed employment agencies that you can lean into. And that can be really helpful in transition planning, because then you can go ahead and contact them and help work that out on how that looks for young people. Let youth take a leadership role. So rather than just have a piece, how can they, in this transition planning, how can they really take the leadership role? Again, focusing on their own community, focusing on their own interests, focusing on their own needs, and really allowing them to take the lead on that and being part of that decision-making process. So again, with choice is power, and allowing them to make choices or to have choices and make some decisions about their transition plan can be really, really vital as well. And then convene families and community together. So families can learn a lot by talking to other families. So how can we provide more spaces for families to learn and engage with each other? And how can we provide more training opportunities for families and caregivers? I know we're going to be implementing more family-centered trainings this next year for 2020, the rest of 2022-23. As we know that it's really important to engage and pull that family in to allow them to have understanding and be part of those conversations, and on a broader scale, the community as well. And lastly, every young person's journey through the process of transitions from school to community is unique, right? We're all unique individuals. We all come from different community knowledge, different intersectionality with where we're from, our identity, our culture, all those different things. So every young person's journey is unique. But I did want to kind of mention that I thought this was really, really interesting. And again, we'll share the link if you want to learn more. But the Youth Truth asked youth, and they partnered with Berkeley to kind of know or get a youth perspective on what they wanted program leaders and educators to know when it came to transitions. And this is what they said. Give students time to connect. So as we're headed back to school, I think this is really helpful, or as we're headed into fall programming, to kind of think about this in a holistic way. But young people have said, give students time to connect. When students were asked to explain kind of what, their thought process was behind this, they said that young people are more engaged when they work collaboratively and with less strict schedules than when they can connect with friends, that they're actually more engaged and are more productive. And a 10th grader commented that being back at school and yet still being isolated from his friends made him sad and lonely, causing a domino effect with schoolwork and academic performance, but rather asked that school leaders and program leaders find ways for students to connect. Another one is to remember the fun stuff. So after 2 years of online school and canceled events, students are keenly aware that they've missed dances, concerts, theater performances, maybe athletic events, sports games, trips. So how can we pull more fun back into our programs, pull more fun back into our educational systems? And again, we're going to be sharing. So Mentor came out with a new resource called Becoming a Better Mentor. And there's an entire chapter dedicated to pulling back sort of the curtain on how can we have fun again in these spaces. And so there's a lot of resources there for you to check out. The third thing was to give young people a chance to be a friend. Students expressed a renewed gratitude for friendships. And one 12th grader wrote, what my school can do for me during this time is to ensure that I don't feel alone and that people care about me and let me know that I'm a friend because during COVID, I became antisocial and wanted more friendships. So how can we foster those friendships between peers? And I know we've added it in the chat as well, but schools found that peer-to-peer mentorship or outreach efforts help students who were disengaged during virtual learning connected to school. So once in school and in classrooms, this cross-age buddy program was a way for them to deepen their sense of community connection. So it's really important that we foster those spaces to allow young people to be a friend. And lastly, slow down. Students pointed out that they're being pushed to catch up. And so students resoundingly asked to slow down, that it causes stress and anxiety. And with everyone stressed, maybe at home and at school, it's making it really difficult for them. So again, slowing down and creating spaces that maybe build community, build creativity, and just plain fun. They're not a waste of time. Instead, they create a fertile ground for deeper, connected, and more meaningful places to learn. So I thought that was really interesting and wanted to point that out. And again, you can learn more from the Youth Truth and some of their work in your resources. And speaking of resources, this is what I was talking about. The mentor came out with an amazing new resource called Becoming a Better Mentor. And within that resource, there's some really important chapters in here that pertain to this work of transition planning and closure specifically. And that's providing emotional support and empathy, goal setting and support, and again, making room for fun and play. And then we also have some really great educational tools for all of you educators out there or that are connected to educational systems. And that's the relationship-centered schools information. I know for some of you, we shared that out last week, but we'll continue to do that. And with all of that, I created 2 resource packets that Allie shared in the chat. One is to support closure and transitions, and the other resource packet is supporting youth with disabilities, again, where you can learn more and get connected to all of this information. So though Holly, maybe not all of you agree that my voice isn't so bad, I would love to invite questions, comments, space for conversation and community. And yeah, just kind of get to know each other a little bit. If anyone, hopefully I didn't talk or lull someone to sleep. I know it's a lot of information, so sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to process all of that. But again, I know that they're kind of this high lift overview, but encourage you to lean in. And if you want to learn more about any of these specific topics, to join or consider joining one of our cohorts where we can dive a little bit deeper. But it's okay if everyone's staying on the pontoon for now. Yeah. No questions? No? Okay. And maybe we can even end a little bit early too. But again, always love your feedback. Again, I pulled from the last event that we had on providing more information about IEPs and 504s and kind of how that looks with education. And again, added it and some of those resources shared, but always looking to bring you more information and content that is helpful for you that you can take back to your teams and your networks. So again, if you want to just point your camera at the QR code, or we'll drop this, and Allie already did because she's so on top of it, an amazing wing person, in the chat for all of you to do as well. And we really do want to stay connected. So if your program is at all interested in getting connected to technical assistance or learning about more of our trainings and workshops, or maybe you came just to kind of explore and you're thinking about starting a mentoring program in your area, any of those things, we'd love to stay connected. And I'll stop sharing, and I can stay on too if anyone else has any questions. Now I can see everyone.